Let me call to order the February 17th, 2021 Planning Commission hearing. Heather, if you'd call the roll.
Mr. Granger,
Here.
Mr. Schaller,
Here.
Ms. Macbeth,
Here.
Mr. Boswell,
Here.
Mr. Klee, Mr. Tarley.
Here.
Okay, the first order of business we have is the approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes in our packet. The regular meeting of January 20th and the work session from January 27th. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes?
I would just state, Madam Chair, that Mr. Boswell sent two minor changes to staff this morning, and we updated them on the web. One was on page 3. Instead of that's parcels development, it should read that parcels, plural development. Also on page 5 in the third paragraph, we changed the wording a little bit to reflect what Mr. Boswell said. So if those additions are okay, that's the only comments I've received from anyone on the minutes.
Thank you, Carol. With those adjustments, are there any other comments or a motion to approve as they now stand?
I move to approve the minutes of January 20 and the work session of minutes of January 27 as modified and currently on the website.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Heather?
Mr. Granger,
Aye.
Mr. Schaller,
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth,
Aye.
Mr. Boswell,
Aye.
Mr. Tarley.
Aye.
We do have an item on the consent agenda, the request of Quarterpath Williamsburg for a community center and pool that has gone through site plan review and is on the consent agenda. Is there any desire to pull this off the consent agenda? So a motion to approve the consent agenda item.
So moved.
Second.
You, Heather?
Mr. Granger,
Aye.
Mr. Schaller,
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth,
Aye.
Mr. Boswell,
Aye.
Mr. Tarley.
Aye.
Okay, there are no public hearings today. There is an open forum, and I do see someone here. So I will open the open forum. If anyone wishes to come forward and speak to the commission on any item in front of us today or on our agendas in general, welcome to do so.
There's no one called in. Mr. Bloom, I don't know if you're here to speak, if you'd like to speak in open forum.
Sir, I was just here for the Quarterpath, just sitting in to make sure.
Okay, thank you. I just wasn't sure. So no pressure there. Thank you. Okay, so closing the open forum. There are no site plans and subdivisions, but we do have unfinished business. Last month, we had a public hearing with regard to the CIP, the capital improvement plan, and that was the focus of our work session. We do have a memo that came out of that meeting that has received some edits, additions that I thought were great comments from John. We do need to approve a memo to send forward to the city manager. Are there any further edits to that memo or acceptance of the substitution from the, what is it, the 6th bullet point to the restatement that John put forward? Any discussion here? Not hearing any, then I guess I would move that we accept the modification of the bullet point and CIP with regard to schools so that that memo can be cleaned up and that is sent forward to the city manager. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Heather.
Mr. Granger,
Aye.
Mr. Schaller,
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth,
Aye.
Mr. Boswell,
Aye.
Mr. Klee,
Aye.
Mr. Tarley,
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we do have new business. Carolyn or Erin, chapter
Yeah.
1, chapter 2. Yep. Thank you.
Right. The first one up is chapter 1. This is my first draft of chapter 1. What I basically did was took the previous 2013 draft and updated it and came up with this new revised draft. And what I tried to do was go through the other chapters that we have previously commented on and put in goals into this chapter so that they tie back to the other chapters in the comp plan. So this is your first review of that. So if anyone has any specific questions or would like to add any additional goals, this is the time I guess we can start to discuss it. I basically kept the first page is similar to the existing one with the 8 different portions of it: the character of the city, the economic vitality, transportation, public safety, education and human services, recreation and cultural, environmental sustainability, and implementation. And then, as was done in the previous comp plan, I tried to put bullets under each of those as to what we had in previous sections to sort of outline the goals for those sections. So if the commission would like to discuss those or provide additional comments on those sections, I'll be happy to discuss it.
Well, I guess I'll dive in. The one question that I had, just looking at character of the city and based upon some of the conversations we've had in the past, and specifically I'm reminded of Mr. Granger's comments when we were discussing the Governor's Inn conversion, is the encouragement of quote unquote affordable housing or workforce housing. Is that something that should be contained with somewhere within the goals chapter?
I think I had it. Yes, I would agree that needs to be in there. And I think in our chapter, we talked about affordable housing, trying to implement the affordable housing initiatives from the Affordable Housing Committee that's getting ready to start up in the city. So I think that would be appropriate to put in here.
And I guess it wouldn't need to have any more detail than that, because there is a committee going forward to study those that issue. Because I think one of the things, if we want that, then I think it's something the city has to financially commit to. Just can't put the burden upon private landowners who want to implement or put in housing. To require them without city involvement. But I would guess there's no need to get into those details until we have a committee report. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that would then allow us the flexibility to use this section to help with doing implementation of whatever comes out of that committee, and city council decides on what initiatives to take from all of that.
Yeah, so I looked in that Roman numeral 1D, the encouraging and appropriate mix. I guess that was the closest we got to talking, I think, about the types of housing that we would have in the city. Right. So maybe
but we would add a bullet E there possibly and expand on that a little bit. If that's what the commission like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
that's what I would suggest.
Probably worth thinking about whether it might belong in economic vitality in that section. The other possible place is human services, but I think probably either economic vitality or character of the city are the two most logical places for it.
I'm good with either of those.
I would agree. I think it works under either one, because the character of the city is composed through the vitality of the city in many ways. And we have to have the diverse population to succeed at both of those.
So Carolyn, on a broader issue on this for me is that the goals and the recommendations are not, perfect corollary, or they're not, equal to each other, but they are sort of a work of art in between the two. So is part of this task for us actually to go chapter by chapter and actually think about these recommendations and how we need to have this, this work of art that creates a goal that relates to the recommendation, and that further gives support for city to go after either resources or to move items forward.
Right. I think what I tried to do was take the recommendations that could fall into a goal and try to craft it as such to create a goal for that. There are some recommendations that, are do this to the zoning ordinance, which I clearly has to be into this. But yes, I tried to go back and go through the recommendations that we did for all the other chapters and sort of put them into one of these categories as to where they need to fit. So I might have missed on one or two or something like that. Something needs to be in two sections, or if you think something's in a, the character of the city and needs to be in economic vitality, I'm happy to move them around. Like, this was my best guess on how to take those recommendations and sort of make them into goals and put them into the specific categories we had in the plan.
Yeah, and I mean, that's how I was looking at this, and I haven't gone back to look at all the different chapters to look at the recommendations and, to have a analogy to a goal. But that, for me, that's the sort of work of art that I see of this chapter 1. And it really, if that's something that helps as a way of thinking about this chapter for other folks, just wanted to share that. This is the first draft we've seen of this, so it seems like.
Right. And the reason this is the first time is because you need to have the other drafts sort of done to be able to craft this chapter up. So that's why it's one of the last ones to come through. So. Sure.
Sure. But I guess I was thinking about that with regard to, since it is the first time we've seen this, I would encourage folks to, be generous with your desires for changing the draft, because it isn't like we've seen it 5 times and we're all ready to go. I mean, it does have a lot of legs underneath it because of all of the recommendations of the other chapters, but it is the first time we've seen it put together this way.
And I would recommend taking a hard look at it, making your recommendations and comments and proposed changes, and just email them to me so that I can include them in a second draft. And I think it'll be a lot easier. And as soon as I get those and do that, I'm happy to send it out to the commission so you can think about it before you get it Friday before your meeting, the next Wednesday. So I'm happy to do that also.
Okay, so are there any other comments right now? I'm not seeing a floodgates, so I don't need to hold up the agenda on this. So why don't we move to chapter 2, the land use?
Yeah, chapter 2 is basically making the minor changes that were mentioned at the last draft meeting we had of this. I did make a pretty big change to the table 2 graph, just to sort of highlight a little bit easier the different sections. So I'm happy to get any feedback on if that's helpful or if something else needs to be done to that, because it's a lot of information. And in the previous plan, this was all in one big long chart, and I had to break it up a little bit to get it onto the page in the new draft format. But I think I basically took and use our color codes to help highlight the different sections. So across the top in the gold, and then the total land area in a gold, and then each section, like residential, commercial, institutional, I did those a little darker, and then the total for those, so that your eye would go to those in a little bit lighter blue color. So I think this helps make that a little bit easier to read, because that was a couple of the comments from the previous draft. And I am getting that existing land use map changed a little teeny bit, and get the colors to reflect back to our color scheme. But other than that, I think this chapter is pretty close. I've made all the changes. Mr. Boswell, thank you for giving me your comments and put them in there. They were minor tweaks basically to most of it. And I think basically this is pretty close to being ready for a final draft.
Yeah, I did have one question about the table 2.1 that you were referencing, and I'm gonna be, if I'm looking like I'm looking someplace else. I have the thing up on another screen here, but for me, this table looks great and follows a lot of our comments, but in looking at it again, the final part, the vacant part, is, we're supposed to interpret that 27% of the acreage of the city of Williamsburg is owned by different people. Obviously, nothing is out there that's not owned by somebody, but is vacant.
Right.
And so, I mean, I guess the sense for me is like, okay, so there's commercial ownership that's,
right,
you know, either a green field or a brown field maybe, but you know, something that's there. Residential house lots that haven't been developed. William and Mary, you know, has woods and things like that. I guess that's what's vacant. But to me, the number 27%, the largest category of anything in that chart is what's vacant. And we always seem to have this story about how landlocked we are, how there's no more room for anything. And so that takeaway that the largest category of land is vacant land just seems to be incongruent, doesn't resonate for me with lots of other stories that we have. And I didn't know whether we needed to have something that explains that number, or maybe I'm not understanding that number.
Yeah, you know, you take the residential. So the residential is basically, you're looking at the golf courses in Colonial Williamsburg. You're also looking at the undeveloped land in Riverside. I'll call it Riverside, then Quarterpath at Williamsburg, because most people know it as Riverside.
Sure.
So start adding those acreages up, you think there's no developable land left. But yeah, I'm happy to, let me think on that and see how I can maybe break that down a little more, because you are right in that William and Mary, a lot of that acreage is in College Woods, which is not developable.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that it might be something that can be resolved in 3 sentences, but when I was trying to put my head around that, you know, with a cross tab to all these other storylines that talk about our needing to have, you know, significant cost benefit analysis as we decide to do this or that, because we're really at that friction point in so many different ways. I'm like, really? You know, I don't know if that struck anybody else.
Yeah, and we're looking at developable versus, you know, I mean, because a golf course is not the same as College Woods. You know, I mean, you've got different categories, so lumping them together, and the vacant places in Quarterpath and the vacant lots here in Holly Hill. I mean, you got different categories of vacant, and you know, some that even though they're owned, they're really not developable, and some that are in that category like golf courses. You know, that is the use. That's how they've been developed. And, you know, they're part of the tourist economy. So I think I certainly agree that some clarification there would be helpful, and maybe just the biggest chunks of that 27%, maybe some explanation about that, about what is not, as Elaine says, what is not, you know, developable or is vacant in a sense, but is actually in use like a golf course.
Yeah,
Is
probably right. As Madam Chair has talked about, 2 or 3 sentences added to that, and I could probably put it on underneath this chart to keep it even on the same page so that you understand it a little better.
You brought up some good points there. Is there any reason to break out that William and Mary 584 acres from the institutional land use category?
Well, we've got the institutional in the other category, so this
right.
is. Yeah.
I'm just saying combining, because it is institutional property. It's owned by William and Mary.
But most of College Woods, John, is protected by statute, and William and Mary can't even develop it. So I think that you could certainly designate it some other way, but I think if you put 584 acres into institutional, it sort of does exactly the opposite of what you want to do.
Well, I guess I don't know what we want to do.
Well,
Yeah.
could it, oh,
Well, I mean,
Environmental?
if the William and Mary vacant is truly the William and Mary Woods, which is protected from development, then in some ways for me, it would be better served to be in environmental as William
Yeah.
and Mary Woods as a protected area.
yeah, I agree. I think when we see vacant, what we see there is vacant and essentially underpurposed or underutilized land in the city. And maybe vacant isn't the right term, therefore, but if it's meant to signify property that's available for use, for building rather, that the College Woods is clearly not, and so it doesn't quite belong in that property. And the conservation area is vacant as well. It's just not. It's just categorized differently right now. So I think this discussion is really about how to classify some of these larger parcels, and whether parcels that have a recreational or an environmental use but might otherwise be classified as vacant. Maybe it would be more effective to reclassify those parcels, simply because of Chair Macbeth's observation that it looks like there's a lot of land ready to be built on around the city, rather than very little as we understand it.
Yeah, part of that William and Mary property, part of it is in the College Woods. The other part on the other side of Monticello Avenue that fronts up on Ironbound Road across
Yeah.
from Newtown, that is property that is developable. And
Yeah.
I think show it as economic development opportunity area in that one. So, but yeah, let me think about that category and see if I can figure out a way to verify and bring that number to what it should be and put it in the other categories. I've got them all sorted separately, so it's easy for me to go look at those parcels and sort of figure it out a little more. But this is basically what we had. Yeah, I can work on that.
That would be great. I think, it gives a potential developer, for example, the wrong idea about how much opportunity there is around the city.
Right.
The other thing I think it's worth mentioning on this subject is when I look at this map, I do see vacant college land. Looks like it could easily be whatever it was, I've forgotten now, 500 acres, 520 something acres. When I look at the residential vacant land, 584. When I look at the residential vacant land on this map, it doesn't look like it adds up to 700 acres, unless I'm just not reading the hatching right. So I see Quarterpath parcel and one other relatively large parcel, but
Yeah. Property over on Capitol Landing Road, and there are a couple other spots, but
some smaller ones, yeah, but it doesn't quite look like 700 acres to me.
You
It
got
certainly
all-
doesn't look like. Well, so I guess I'm just thinking maybe that also needs to be examined and maybe reclassified or clarified, I guess.
okay.
Yeah, I think those are good suggestions. And maybe, I don't like to resort to wordsmithing, but I guess that's what I do for a living. I don't like that. I agree with you. I don't like that term vacant. Is unimproved a better term? Because I think what we're talking about is land that has no structure on it, I'm assuming.
But could be developed.
But could be developed, and that would be unimproved land rather than vacant. I don't like that term either, I would agree.
And when we get to golf courses, that's developed, but not in the traditional sense of development. But I'm pretty sure it costs a lot to build a golf course, and somebody would consider that developed.
Yes, improved, but vacant.
Okay, thank you, everyone. My one question has led to a 10-minute discussion on this, so so I appreciate that. I wasn't totally alone in my consternation of how that was being seen there. and how we can maybe make that one better. But I think we've given Carolyn a bunch of suggestions there. Is there anything else in the land use categories? I mean, this is the second time we've seen it in the actual land use categories, which then go to zoning categories and all that. I think we were pretty okay with last time, but happy to get any comments on the rest of that chapter.
Before we move from this map, I do want to recommend that we send this map to the Arts Council as an example of modern art created in Williamsburg. So it's really, just the visual is pretty incredible. So Carolyn, well done with that.
Yeah, it is the visual of this. It is. I mean, I'm sure it was a painstaking process, but it is a really great map, and the ability to have it online where we can zoom in and really see the details is great. I think that for me, in some ways, the different categories, I don't have as much concern about some of these things when I can look at the map and say, oh, well, I know that's actually a golf course. Someone might want to do something else with that golf course, but I understand it's not vacant or here and there. But I mean, and that's where the sort of the transcription of the visual data to the numerical data is what's the difference. But this is a great map. So thank you, Carolyn, for the work on that, really.
Yeah, what I'll do is go and look at that up and send you guys a revised draft, and then you can let me know what you think of that. And if that's okay, then we'll move on with draft 3 from that then. But I think I can pretty identify that pretty easily.
Okay. Anything else on this chapter? Okay, well, not seeing anything. Then is there any other business that anyone needs to bring forward to the commission on our business activities? I did have one question, Carol. Is what used to be the Neighborhood Balance Committee is now the Affordable Housing Committee?
No, the Neighborhood Balance Committee finished its work. It's the Affordable Housing Work Group is the one that Justin's on, and that's up, I think, our first meeting. I believe it's next Thursday, not this week, but next week. And I think we're looking at a few meetings on that, and it's to look at the affordable. It's looking at Sarah Stafford, Dr. Stafford's report, and looking at affordability and workforce housing. So we've got a whole committee for that topic, just like we had for the neighborhood balance. So the neighborhood balance is reported out to council, and now we're looking at doing some implementation based on that report, and we're starting up the affordable housing initiative.
Okay, cool. And thank you, Justin, for representing us in that group. And just other updates of things that have happened from the most recent city council meeting. There's a new arts council. One of us will be needing to represent us on that as that rolls forward, but that hasn't gotten to that stage yet. We have a good 15 to 20 pages of information items in our packet as usual. I want to highlight a couple of agenda items for us. One is that we don't have a work session next Thursday. So you have that Wednesday afternoon back on your calendars to fill with your regular day jobs. There are currently no there are no public hearings scheduled for March 17th, our next scheduled planning commission meeting. And because of that, or if it stays as such, we will roll that date into a work session.
Yes, if that's okay with the commission, I will just cancel the regular meeting and do a work session at 4 o'clock.
Yep. Works. Okay, cool. Okay, well then, if there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.